Welcome to FlightGlobal Focus. My name is Amber Elias, and joining me for this Airline Focus episode is Airline Business Editor and FlightGlobal's Airlines Managing Editor, Lewis Harper.
Hi, Amber.
Let's take a look at the top aviation stories this week on FlightGlobal. South African investigators have disclosed that an Airbus A330-300 pilot tried to stabilise and overspeed manually during a clear air turbulence encounter, rather than leaving the autopilot engaged. 4 cabin crew members were injured, however there were no injuries among the 211 passengers. Norway continues to analyse the options for a future anti-submarine warfare helicopter to equip its new UK-built Type 26 frigates. As the Nordic nation wrestles with multiple rotorcraft procurement programs, Norway has been seeking a new ASW helicopter for some time since the premature retirement of its NH Industries NH90 fleet in 2022, which is currently the subject of a court battle, but it has seemed to be closing in on a decision tied to the acquisition of new frigates. Icelandair will end wide-body operations in 2026 after bringing forward the timeline for phasing out its Boeing 767-300ER twin jets by several years amid an effort to address unsustainable losses. It made the announcement while forecasting a full-year loss for 2025 during its Q3 earnings briefing call yesterday on 23 October. Lewis, this is a special preview of Monday's Airline Focus episode where we go through the Airline Business 2024 rankings, an annual project you do every year which ranks the top 100 airlines around the world by both revenue and traffic. Can you tell us a little bit more about how the data for this report comes together?
Thanks, Amber. Yeah, so we produce this every year and have been across the 9 years I've been at Airline Business and for longer than that. As you say, we look at operating revenues, so we rank the top 100 global airline groups by that metric. For that, we use a conversion into US dollars so that we can compare airlines around the world. For passenger traffic, which is the other top 100 ranking, we use the revenue passenger kilometre figure, or RPK as it is commonly known. We obviously use some of our own data for this. We also do a lot of research for it. And in a small minority of cases, we have to make our own estimates. So this might be because the airline doesn't publicly release data or it's late in doing so. But we always use kind of partial data for that. So we might have a capacity figure for an airline that enables us to estimate the traffic, that kind of thing. As I said, much of the data we already have on the Airline Business website. We also, beyond the metrics that actually inform the top 100 ranking, next to those numbers, some other key metrics that are really interesting to look at and that we also aggregate across the global industry. So that would be operating and net profits, passenger and cargo revenue, capacity in ASKs, passenger numbers, and load factors. And of course, doing a top 100, you have to look at many more airlines than just the previous year's top 100 to make sure you capture those airlines moving in and out. So a big task, takes a lot of time, but we do get a lot of good outputs from it.
And how do these rankings reflect the broader industry?
You can see lots of trends in the data, some of them historical, some of them that have continued through to 2025 and will probably continue way beyond that. So to name a few of the broader industry trends, the dominance of the big US network carriers in terms of size and financial contribution to global revenue really stands out when you see the rankings. The struggles Chinese carriers are having at the moment to achieve decent financial returns, despite, if you look at the traffic rankings, really significant capacity increases. You can also see the airlines that have or have not fully recovered from the severe downturn we saw during COVID-19. So there are, while many airlines, for example, will be seeing revenue above 2019 levels, that won't necessarily translate into passenger traffic being above 2019 levels. There are still some airlines that are where their revenue's below 2019. So yeah, lots of interesting trends there. The emerging markets, really interesting to see in the rankings as well. So if you look at India, you can really get a hold on where they are globally and where they might get to and how far they are off reaching the higher ends of the rankings amid, pretty ambitious growth plans in that country. The impact of factors such as the Pratt & Whitney GTF groundings as well really stands out in the rankings. So there are carriers whose revenue was lower year on year who are in that grouping, some whose traffic didn't rise year on year, so they stand out. And also the pretty significant losses from airlines that entered Chapter 11 in the recent months. So if you look at Azul or Spirit, for example, you can see their net and operating profits against their peers, and it really stands out how much higher they are. But on the other end of the scale, you really, in the profit terms, an airline group like Emirates really stands out in the sense that it's pretty far ahead of rivals by some metrics. So loads of his trends, more than I could mention here, but it certainly makes for interesting reading from that point of view.
There are always some surprises in every year's report, obviously since the pandemic in 2020, and of course the recovery since then. Is 2024 the same?
Yeah, there are. Whether this is a surprise to you or not probably depends on, certainly for someone back in 2020 at the height of the pandemic where everyone thought the industry was changed forever, this would be. But it really is interesting just how much the industry looks like the pre-COVID one, particularly in this most recent data, where there's certainly been a degree of normalization even compared to the data we pulled last year, which is largely based on 2023 data. For example, the top 10 airline groups by revenue are the same basket of carriers that they were in 2019. The proportion of revenue contribution from each region when the data is aggregated is almost exactly the same as that seen in 2019 in our most recent data. So lots of ways in which those predictions of big changes in the fundamentals of the airline industry at the height of COVID really have not come to pass. Other interesting trends, certainly, again, depends where you're coming from, but European airlines are the biggest contributors to global profits among the top 100 airline groups in the new rankings. That would definitely be a surprise to anyone who has heard them complain about a lack of competitiveness in the region, complaints about too much regulation, too many taxes, etc. So a bit inconvenient for that narrative. And as I say, a surprise for some people maybe. And also, one thing I find quite surprising putting this together is obviously we know it's an industry that works on really small margins, but the vast majority of airline groups in the top 100 by revenue also made operating and net profits in 2024. I'm not by any means saying it's an easy industry to be in. I think it's anything but a lot of the time. But sometimes when you see those cold, hard figures, they do sometimes sort of uncover some misconceptions about how the industry performs. And I think that's where some of the real value comes from this. It's we have lots of instincts about who the biggest airlines are, how the industry is performing, what low margins mean for airlines. But when you actually see these cold, hard figures, as I say, it really perhaps changes your mind on some things, reinforces that you're right on others. But yeah, there's a lot you can take from it, I think.
Absolutely. And, it's so easy to, as you say, make assumptions about the industry based on what we sort of see that the airlines are putting out, that we're seeing in the news about traffic and about sort of the passenger experience. But really having the data here explains some of the things that we're seeing and also defies some of the other things and puts out an entirely new narrative that is very fascinating when you're looking at the numbers.
Absolutely, yeah. It's an exercise. Yeah, while I'm doing it, that some of these things will kind of occur to me as I'm doing it, and that's part of the fun in pulling this together, to be honest. And I think part of, I say, the value in when you get to see the final rankings and the analysis we do of it. So definitely a must read for anyone interested in or involved in the airline industry, I think.
Absolutely. And join us on Monday for a deeper dive episode into the Airline Business 2024 rankings of the top 100 airlines. Thanks, Lewis, for joining me on this News Focus episode.
Thanks, Amber. Thanks for having me.
FlightGlobal Focus is your new essential podcast for trusted aviation insight. We publish new episodes twice weekly. Join us on Friday for a concise news briefing and on Monday for in-depth analysis covering airlines, defense, and aerospace. FlightGlobal Focus is a production of FlightGlobal with audio editing by Lucy Johnson. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, or for commercial opportunities, please email podcast@flightglobal.com and more information can be found in the show notes. Listeners can get a discount on a new subscription to Airline Business with the code ABPodcast and to FlightGlobal with the code FGPodcast. Terms and conditions apply. Listen, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.